big question for you. Should companies be forced to publish the wages earned by their male and female staff? David Cameron believes it will help abolish unequal pay in the workforce. But some argue there's no problem to solve. Let's get more on this with writer and broadcaster Milo Yiannopoulos and journalist and author Nikki Hodgson. Ladies first. Nikki, what do you think?
I think it's a great idea. It's brilliant that David Cameron hasn't embraced this initiative, which I actually think came from Labour originally. It doesn't need to be a finger-pointing exercise. I think that's the main point to make. This is just a really good chance to look at how boosting women's earning power can boost the economy.
You disagree, Milo?
Well, actually, I think it's a great idea, but not for the same reasons. The problem is that what most people don't realise, the gender pay gap is a sort of myth. No economist takes it seriously. The ONS figures come from broad church sort of averages across the workforce, and when you take into account the different choices women make, whether or not you include children in that, actually the pay gap narrows to zero. So I'm in favour of this only because it's going to really embarrass these campaigners who constantly tell women that they're victims and that they're suffering under this sort of patriarchal society. Actually, women and men get paid pretty much the same, to the point of a couple of percent. So I am in favour of it, but only because it's going to explode one of the most persistent feminist myths of our time, the gender pay gap.
Nikki, it amounts to zero, this pay gap.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think the issue is that women tend to take, lower paid work, more part-time work. In these kinds of companies, that's not the case. But what it is going to show is how women are not very good at pushing themselves forward sometimes in the corporate environment. And they really struggle to ask for what they're worth. And that is a problem for all of us, because ultimately that, affects the economy, it affects the earning potential of these companies.
Milo, the latest percentages suggest that the gender pay gap currently stands at 19.1%, which means a woman on average earns 80p for every pound a man earns.
Well, the Office for National Statistics figures are based on 1% of an average right the way across the industry, so they don't take into account the different kinds of jobs people are doing, so really they're effectively meaningless. But there's a very simple question that demonstrates why the whole debate is nonsense and why the pay gap is a ridiculous sort of fabrication. And it's this: if women are doing the same work for less money, why aren't companies full of women? Why aren't employers going out actively seeking women? Well, they don't, and they don't for some of the same reasons that women take different sorts of roles and different part-time roles. Women don't work as long hours as men do, even if they don't have children. They take longer holidays. They don't make as much money for their firms. They don't work the same overtime. So we can't really expect them to be compensated the same as men when they don't work as hard. Now, that's not, I don't mean that to sound, unkind about women. Women simply have different priorities in life. Most women want a more balanced life. They want time with their family. They want to do hobbies. They want more time away on holiday. They don't want to put in the work that those sort of obsessive, aggressive, sort of goal-oriented male professions sometimes demand. The law, for example. Women just aren't really interested in devoting their whole life to work in that way. And the very broad brush figures from the ONS simply reflect that. What they don't show is that a woman going to the workplace is going to be paid less than a man for the same. In fact, under the age of 35 in the UK and the US, women are paid more in the same sorts of roles, and they're 2 to 1 more likely to get jobs in science and maths because employers are so desperate to hire women.
Nikki's not generalising at all there about how hard women work.
No, exactly. I think there's hundreds of women that won't be watching this programme because they're too busy working in order to argue with that point. I don't think that's true at all. What we really have is a social problem, a problem where we expect women to take the burden of family care, to care for elder relatives, and so as a result they often end up working less hard, as Milo puts it, because what they're doing is they're working second shifts, third shifts, caring for other people. What we need is a culture change to allow women to be able to work just as hard as men if they so choose, and that isn't happening yet. But what would be good about publishing these results is that it would pave the way for a conversation about how society is structured so that women aren't able to function as highly as men are in some professions.
Oh, you were too gentle with him. Milo, are you suggesting for 1 second that I do not work as hard as my male colleagues? I take more time off than my male colleagues. Well, I think, and I am not in any way as committed as my male colleagues.
I think, and I mean this in the nicest and most complimentary way possible, you're probably atypical in most respects as a sort of workaholic of either gender. You're probably not typical of women. You're probably not typical of anyone in the kind of work that you do. What I'm talking about is not, bashing women for not putting in the hours. What I'm saying is, in general, women look for different things from life. So they look to fulfill themselves to flourish in slightly different ways. And of course, if you look at the end statistics about pay, they're going to reflect that. That's not necessarily a problem. Now, when people lose the economic argument, they always switch to the social argument, as your other guest just did. And unfortunately, the problem is that a lot of this is underpinned by this sort of constant victimhood complex that women are encouraged to buy into. They're given this victimhood script about, whether it's rape culture on campus or pay under the average, under the male average. And most of it's based on ridiculous sort of social science studies that don't stand up to the most basic scrutiny. Most of it simply isn't true. And I think the majority of women don't want to be patronised, don't want to be given special privileges, don't want to be given special dispensation. They want to go out to the workplace, be paid what they're worth. And, of course, if they want to raise a family, they're not going to get to be CEO or not going to get to, to be a partner in a law firm. You can't have it all. You can't do all of these things. And what really sort of frustrates me, and I think frustrates a lot of ordinary women who, find these sorts of debates a bit dull and a bit mystifying, is that there's some sort of somehow implication always behind the scenes that being, that motherhood is a bad thing, and that it's a bad thing for a woman to aspire to raise a family and to be a mother. Actually, it's sort of one of the most extraordinary things that anybody can accomplish and anybody can do. But there's this sort of assumption that, if you do that, then we've got to make sort of special dispensation when you go back to work and pay you more and give you all these benefits and whatever, rather than celebrating the unique things that women can do in society that men can't.
He started off that answer, Nikki, by trying to compliment me and take the wind out of my sails. You have a go.
Absolutely. I've got no time for that argument whatsoever. Women want to do many varied and amazing things for their lives. Motherhood might be part of that. But, again, if that's such a wonderful thing to do, why are men not bending over backwards to take time off to raise their children? They're not, because the culture is not set up to encourage men to share the load of care. Women, even when they're married and working, do more domestic chores than men do. We've seen these surveys time and time again, and I think it's really insulting to say that women, might not be as inclined to work as hard or want different things from life. There are plenty of women who are hugely ambitious. Just look at the number of graduates that we have now. Women are outstripping men. They're getting better degrees. What we haven't seen yet is culture change to accommodate and to reflect that. And I think the other thing is that it tends to be older women often that are also in part-time work positions, but we shouldn't just leave them to flounder. They're often picking up care bills for elderly parents as well as looking after children and the rest of their families. So, I just think Milo's argument is ridiculous that women, shouldn't be paid as much because they want other things from life.
OK, Milo, we've been given more time, so you're going to have to work even harder. It's more than 40 years since the Equal Pay Act, and yet still it is a fact that women do not earn as much as men.
No, I'm sorry, it's not a fact. You can only say that if you take broad brush averages across all industries and all genders, and you can say the amount of money going to women is a bit less.
Well,
it's not. I mean, for one thing, it's illegal to pay a woman less than a man for the same work.
Interrupt him, Nikki. Go on.
No, they say,
it's illegal to pay a woman less.
If that's the case, then when these results are published, they won't reveal anything. They won't reveal any difference, but they're going to. That's the point. The whole reason David Cameron is encouraging it.
I want them to be published because what they're going to show is that at all stages, all else being equal, the genders are paid the same. Or even what they might show, you're saying the culture hasn't changed. I think your argument's 20 years out of date. The culture has changed, which is precisely why there are more women going to university, more women graduate from university, they're getting higher grades, they're 2-to-1 favoured when they go for job applications, particularly in science and technology, and they're paid more, depending on whose figures you believe, up to the age of 30, 35 or 39, it's probably about 35, women are paid more than men.
But
so whatever gender pay gap you're talking about has already been fixed.
But it hasn't.
So the good news for you is that there isn't a problem anymore, although there used to be, and that if we do release these figures, which I'm very excited about, they're going to prove me right. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
But that's not true. I mean, the point is the gap is there still, and older women in particular suffer more from it from younger women. We shouldn't just leave older women, to flounder, should we? Just because they were part of a generation where it was even more difficult for them to get on.
I'm making a specific explanation about where these figures come from, and you haven't really addressed the point that I'm making. What I'm saying is that you can only create this gender gap when you take a broad brush across all genders, all sectors, all work. That doesn't reflect the different choices people make, and employers shouldn't be forced to pay a full-time salary to somebody who works part-time. You haven't come up with a solution to that, and you haven't addressed the problem with the figures, which is that no serious economist treats the gender pay gap as a problem to be solved. No economist thinks this is a problem because they realise what I'm explaining.
Is that male economists or female economists, just to be clear?
Well, I mean, where I get most of my figures on this from is from a feminist female academic, Christina Hoff Sommers at the American Enterprise Institute in the US, who looks at the figures from the UK and the US, and she does a broad survey of all economists, I'm sure law of all genders. But my source for this sort of stuff is generally Christina Hoff Sommers. So she is a female feminist academic who is mystified that this is this sort of feminist myth that won't die.
Good for her. Nikki, final thought to you.
I just think that we need to see the figures published, because then we can start analysing the data. You know, publishing the numbers without any analysis of it is obviously going to be a waste of time and no use. But I think David Cameron should be applauded, actually, for this move.
We can agree on that much.
OK. You've both worked equally hard. Both of you submit your invoices. You both get paid the same. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. Thank you. Lots